he said, and he called for a concrete operational war on terrorism before the towers had even fallen on 9/11, which tells you that 9/11 was basically used to kickstart something that Israelis had been trying to start since 1979, and that was the war on terrorism. And here they are very happily scolding the troika of terror, Shimon Peres, Netanyahu, and Ehud Barak. And this man, Shimon Peres, is actually the godfather, capo di tutti, in Israel. He's the guy who was responsible for bringing arms illegally to Israel in the late 40s. Then he was put in charge of creating the nuclear arsenal, which Israel has. Now, if you understand that nuclear weapons in the hands of a terrorist gang are a threat to world peace, you can see that the real threat we have in the Middle East is the fact that the Israeli government has hundreds of nuclear weapons. Iran's not a problem. Israel's a problem. Because this is a terrorist regime. This is a state that employs terrorism to get their strategic goals accomplished. And they have nuclear weapons. And they use extortion and threats and blackmail to get what they need. Most of our Congress is either blackmailed or extorted.
Yep.
Now this is the former head of the Mossad, the first founder of the Shin Bet, Israel Shin Bet, domestic intelligence, first director of Mossad, and his name is Issa Harel, and this is the motto of the Mossad in Hebrew. It basically says that by deception we shall wage war, and that's the World Trade Center. And he predicted in 1979 that the tallest building in New York City would be bombed. He said Arabs would do that. In 1979, he said that. Here he is. He's born in Russia, like most of them. And he predicted in 1979 that Arab terrorism would come to New York City and that they would bomb our tallest building. Here he is later in life. Here's the man who made that prediction too. This is what you call a Christian Zionist evangelist. His name is Michael D. Evans. He's from Texas, but not really from Texas. And he's a supporter of extreme right-wing Zionism. He's also Jewish, but that's neither here nor there. Now here he is on his mission to Israel with the Netanyahu, father Netanyahu, son Netanyahu, who at that time I think was selling furniture, a furniture salesman, and then some unidentified woman. And this is in 1979 when he was told, here he is with Menachem Begin in 1979. This is when he's meeting the prime minister of the country, so he's obviously a pretty highfalutin evangelist from Texas to have, to be able to meet Mr. Begin, and to be so buddy-buddy with him. And he said that this is the guy that said just after 9/11 that Issa Harel had told him in 1979 that Arabs would attack the World Trade Center. Now you have to ask yourself, how would the head of the Mossad, the Israeli Mossad, know that Arabs plan to bomb the World Trade Center, something that happens 22 years later? You have to understand that this whole operation, so the genesis of the idea, is all Israeli. It's not Arab. The Arabs have no desire to bomb American buildings. This is an Israeli plot. Here's these characters. This is Michael Evans speaking in Caesarea in Israel. He's a Zionist. He does everything he can to get Christians to support the state of Israel. And there's Glenn Beck and a guy named David Barton down below. Now, here's one of the guys who this guy is named Arnon Milchan. And from what I understood from reading the news, that two of the best films in the nomination for the last Academy Awards were his films. He's an Israeli. He's a Mossad agent. He's also a very high agent in a covert group called Lechem, which was the group that Israel put together, Shimon Peres put together, to obtain the components for a nuclear arsenal from the United States illegally. And he was their agent for that. So he was found guilty of smuggling nuclear triggers, these little devices called Krytrons, and he had smuggled something like 800 of these little triggers that detonate nuclear bombs to Israel. When the FBI and the U.S. State Department found out, they demanded that Israel return these devices. Israel gave back 400 and kept 400. But here's Arnon Milchan in Hollywood, and those are two of his people that work for him, Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Here he is with his real friends, Shimon Peres and Netanyahu. Very high level agent. The fact that he's been identified now as an agent only came out in a book, a biography published I think 2010 called Confidential. But his first movie was in 1978. Now this is very interesting. In 1978, this Mossad agent is making his first movie, and the climactic scene in the movie is a Boeing 747 flying into the Pan Am building. So this is, they're preparing the models for this filming of the scene. And that's the scene from the book. The movie was called Medusa Touch, based on the book. This is the book. Now don't let the name Peter Van Greenway fool you. It's not his real name. The author was a Jewish guy. The publisher is a Jewish publisher, and the movie is an Israeli movie. So this is a Jewish collaboration here, Israeli collaboration, and Richard Burton played the role of the main character, and he had like this telekinetic power, so he would dream something or think something would happen. And the big thing was he dreamed the 747 going in the building. Well, it wasn't really Richard Burton who dreamed that up. And in the year 2000, again, Arnon Milchan, that was his first movie in '78. Now this is a movie he made with New Regency Films. He's a partner in business partner with Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, and they made this movie in 2000 in which an airplane flies directly into the World Trade Center. It's filmed at night. It was at night scene, so it's not very clear there. But that's the plane, which is just like the story went like this: that the pilot is flying the plane. It's a passenger plane going through New York. And the plane has been hijacked remotely. So the pilot is unaware, but he has no control of the plane. And the people who have taken over control of the plane are flying the plane into the World Trade Center. And this aired on TV in March of 2001, and millions of people watched it. So for Condoleezza Rice to say, oh, we never had the foggiest idea that such a thing could happen, she's in La La Land, because it's been shown on TV. But this is, again, Arnon Milchan's production. So Arnon Milchan has this idea that planes flying into buildings make good movies. What that is what I call ideation. It's putting the idea out there. It's putting the idea out there in the public mind so that when such a thing does happen, they say, aha, just like in that movie I saw.
Like predictive programming?
Yeah, exactly. And here we have one of the Mossad agents who got the contract, the security contract for the World Trade Center in 1986 or 87, I think. And his name is Zvi Malkin, and he was involved in plutonium smuggling, which means that he's part of that group, Lechem, that was getting nuclear material for Israel's illegal arsenal. So he was involved in plutonium smuggling from Pennsylvania, and he was also involved in Eichmann kidnapping in Argentina years before. So he's a veteran Mossad guy. But at age 49, he retired from the Mossad, if you believe that, and came to New York to start dabbling in painting. Along with this character, Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor. Now this guy was Malkin's partner in getting the contract for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Now, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey own more than the World Trade Center. They control the ports, the airports, the harbors, the subway. So this Israeli company, Atwell Security of Tel Aviv, had gotten the contract in 1987, and only because somebody at the Port Authority discovered that this character was a murderer in Israel, that they tore up the contract. Had they not torn up the contract, 9/11 would have happened 10 years earlier, which is what they really wanted. And here's the guy that ran Lechem. This is a partner. This is Avi. This is Rafi Eitan, and he's still in the parliament today. And he ran the Pollard Sky scandal, the spy. The guy's in jail now. He also ran that Lechem program to get the nuclear stuff to Israel. Those men were working for him, the two previous men, Malkin and Ben-Dor. And here this photograph is interesting because this shows him with another fine Israeli, Aviram Nir. This guy was the guy who ran Iran-Contra. Now, Iran-Contra was an Israeli operation. So, during the break, we were talking about the Clintons' relationship to this whole thing. The Clintons are deeply tied into Iran-Contra, as is the Bush family. So it's like they say that nothing binds people more closely together than a crime committed together. Well, Iran-Contra is the crime where you have the Bush family, the Clinton family, and the Israelis. And guess who the alpha dog is? The Israelis. The Israelis ran the whole Iran-Contra thing. This fellow, And to get out of the scene, he did a Huckleberry Finn trick. You know, they said that he died in a plane crash in Mexico. We don't know. He probably got a face operation in Tel Aviv. Now this is the guy that owned Atwell Security. This is the owner of that company that was going to get the World Trade Center contract. He's Mr. Big in Israel. He's dead now. But he was Mr. Big in Asia. He lived mostly in Shanghai and China and in Japan. And he lived in Japan since 1939 or 1940. He was actually advising the Japanese Imperial Army during the war. And the Japanese Imperial Army was training his Beitar guys, his what you call like Jewish black shirts, in terrorism. They were training these young men from Europe, Jewish men, in terrorism, and then these guys were going to Palestine where they were practicing their art of terrorism. Well, this guy, he owned Israel Corporation, he owned Zim Corporation, he owned all these big Israeli companies. He was Mr. Big. Like if you talk about a James Bond book, this would be one of the main guys. You know, one of those mega criminals. Well, when the Mossad was thwarted in getting the security contract in the 1980s, they didn't give up. They didn't give up on their plan. You see, it set them back 10 years, right? But they didn't give up. So what they did is they tried to get the security contract for the towers through American Jews. This guy's one of them. His name is Jules Kroll. And he owned a company called Kroll Associates, which got the security contract in 1993 when the first bomb went off in the basement. And then Kroll Associates revamped the whole security procedure for the World Trade Center. And they remained in charge of security for the buildings until 2001, Jules Kroll. And his partner in crime is this man, Maurice Greenberg. Maurice Greenberg was the CEO of AIG, you might remember. This is the guy whose company received $180 billion of bailout, taxpayer bailout money, in order to bail out the big banks that he had insured. He had insured and this guy is a criminal, there's no question about it. He once said at a board meeting, if we were legal, we wouldn't be in business. This is another guy from Kroll Associates right here. Those two characters owned Kroll Associates together. This guy worked for him, Jerome Hauer. Jerome Hauer was not only a former employee of Kroll Associates, but he was the director of the New York City Office of Emergency Management for 4 years prior to 9/11. And he's the guy who oversaw the construction of the Office of Emergency Management headquarters that were in the 23rd floor of Building 7. It was a hardened bunker. It could withstand, you know, a typhoon or a hurricane or anything. Bulletproof glass, everything. Its own water, its own air, its own everything. So it's thought that this 23rd floor bunker on the Building 7 was probably the control central for the demolition that occurred that day. And this guy was in San Diego on 9/11, and he came on the air very early and, of course, blamed Osama bin Laden. You see, so from left and from right, the English-speaking people, the American people, were being told a false narrative from the very beginning. Because when something like this happens, the population is in a state of shock and awe. And then the master psychologists know that you have to come right in and print on their mind, give them a plausible explanation, which they will then believe. That's it. They're just looking for answers, and they'll just take that answer and live with it.
Was Marvin Bush connected to Kroll somehow?
No. Here's Rahm Emanuel. He was the senior advisor to Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. He's the guy that pushed NAFTA through. He served in the Israeli army. I told you his father was involved in the Stern gang that killed Volker Bernadotte. He's the mayor of Chicago now. But he was the key man in both the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. First one. Here he is when he was a special advisor to Bill Clinton. He looks like about 15 years old. But at that ripe age, in 1993, he single-handedly pushed NAFTA through. Now you have to ask yourself, why would a Mossad agent in a White House want NAFTA to be pushed through? And unless they want to destroy the manufacturing sector of the United States and bring America down several notches. But why? You see? Whose interests are they really serving? And here he is during the Obama administration. He was chief of staff, first chief of staff. He's the first man that Obama appointed. And this is David Axelrod. And these two characters made Obama the candidate. I'm from Chicago. Obama was a nobody in Chicago. He was in the State House for a little while. But these characters were assigned to make him a candidate for office. And in 1992, a Chicago Jewish woman named Betty Lou Saltzman, presented Barack Obama to the Jewish audience and said, Barack Obama will be America's first black president in 1992. And then she commissioned these two men to make him a candidate. And who's Betty Lou Saltzman? She is the daughter of Philip Morris Klutznick. Philip Morris Klutznick is one of these billionaire Jews, but he was, more importantly, he was the president of the International Order of B'nai B'rith. The International Order of B'nai B'rith is the Zionist Jewish Freemasonic organization, which is completely private and behind closed doors. And only Jews can belong, and only male Jews, and only Jews who are Zionists can belong. So you see, in a free society like ours, people like that can conspire in plain sight. And you know, the B'nai B'rith, they own the Anti-Defamation League. It's the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, and they also control Hillel, which is on every college campus in America. So you talk about organized, they're organized. And this was the rabbi who was in charge of the money at the Pentagon when 9/11 happened. His name was Rabbi Dov Zakheim. And he was the comptroller at the Pentagon. And you probably are aware that the day before 9/11 happened, on September 10th, Donald Rumsfeld had a press conference, and he said that something like $2.1 trillion is unaccountable for. And of course, the section of the Pentagon that was hit was the section that was counting the money. And this guy's saying, well, I don't know where it went. Maybe Tel Aviv. This is Lou Eisenberg. He was the head of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey when the towers were privatized. You have to understand that those towers were basically public property, quasi-public property, and they were transferred to private hands. And those private hands they were transferred to were the hands of Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein, of course, did not have the money to buy these buildings. He used $100 million that he got lent to him from GMAC, the company that went belly up in 2008. It had been taken over by Zionist Jews, the American boys, I think, American. And they had taken over GMAC, then they plundered it, used $100 million to give to Larry Silverstein for the World Trade Center. And then they went belly up in 2008. You see, this guy, he was the head of the National Republican Council, I think it's called, the Republican National Committee, after his stint at the Port Authority. But he's the one that oversaw the negotiations whereby the Port Authority turned over the property of the World Trade Center to Larry Silverstein. Now there was another group that wanted to get the World Trade Center called Vornado Realty in New York, and Vornado would have been the most likely company to get it, but they kept telling Vornado, oh, you're going to have to pay all this back taxes, and you're going to have to pay for all this asbestos and this blah 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 blah. And so basically Vornado said, forget about it, we're out of here, and then it went right to Larry Silverstein, which was what they intended. And this guy is Ronald Lauder. He was the head of the director of the New York privatization scheme in which this was done. And this was done for Governor Pataki. He, of course, is a Mossad agent, is an American, but he has a school of government at Mossad University. Mossad has their own college called the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel. And he's got the Lauder School of Government there. So he's very close to the Mossad boys. And here are these characters who were behind the privatization. Here we have Lauder, Rockefeller. They built the buildings in the beginning. And then Mayor Bloomberg. And in the back is Governor Pataki, kind of like the useful idiot in the picture. The guys in the front, they know more than Pataki does. And here's, if you read any books by David Icke will often refer to something called the lizard people. And he kind of loses his reader there. What is he talking about? Well, if he's talking about actual people, I would say that Larry Silverstein is a good candidate as a lizard person. Look at those eyes. But he is the guy that, as I told you, his claim to fame prior to 9/11 was that he had run a strip club. He owned a strip club by LaGuardia Airport called Runway 69. And he'd been indicted in a drug smuggling scheme with the Clinton family. But that of course that was denied. That case was dismissed. But here he got a hold of the World Trade Center. The first thing he did with that borrowed money, he borrowed the $100 million, got put it on down payment. The first thing he did is he jacked the rental rates up 40%. Why did he do that? Because he was insuring the property. He was insuring the property against terrorist attack, and he was also insuring his future rents. So by jacking up the rents 40%, it gave him the increased, 40% margin from the insurance company when he collected. Now, another interesting thing about him is that every Sunday, for years prior to 9/11, he would speak to Netanyahu on the phone every Sunday afternoon, wherever they were in the world, they would communicate by phone and have a conversation. What were they talking about? Football? I don't think so. And here's his partner in crime. This is Larry Silverstein's partner in crime. His name is Frank Lowy. He's a former Israeli commando from Czechoslovakia or someplace like that. Who, after the war in 1948, in 1950 or so, he went to Australia and he started buying up strip malls and things. And in this country, he owns a series of malls, big malls called Westfield malls. So if you ever go to Westfield Mall, you know, it's belonging to this character. And what he did in 9/11 is that he had gotten a lease, the 99-year lease for the retail space in the concourse level. Larry Silverstein got the 99-year lease on the towers themselves. Now, who were the guys with the white hats on 9/11? Well, these characters. This is the Department of Justice. This is the top law enforcement attorney general of the United States. Is John Ashcroft, a Christian Zionist from the get-go. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And then this was his assistant. This man was an assistant attorney general in charge of the criminal division, which meant, this guy's an Israeli. His name is Michael Chertoff. His mother was a Mossad agent. His mother's name was Levia Eisen. She was a Mossad agent. She was involved in all kinds of stuff back in the late 40s. But this guy is what you would call a dual national, which means he has an American passport and he's recognized as being an American citizen, but in the back pocket he's got his Israeli passport. And because he was Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal division, it fell upon his shoulders to prosecute the crimes of 9/11. But, as we now know, there was no prosecution because there was no investigation. He's the one who allowed the evidence to be destroyed. So if you're going to prosecute the criminals of 9/11, the ones that are culpable for crimes, you would start with these two guys. And of course, they serve under George Bush and Dick Cheney. So those four guys right away would be the first people you prosecute. Because last time I checked, it's a crime to destroy evidence from a crime scene. And New York City was the crime scene where 3,000 people got killed nearly, and all that evidence was destroyed. And here, after, he looks a bit like Lenin, but here he is after he served as the Attorney General. There was a brief hiatus, and then he became Secretary of Homeland Security. And as the Secretary of Homeland Security, he was then in a position to maintain his control over the evidence. So remember I was talking about access to the evidence is essential? This man had control over the evidence of 9/11 until 2009. And so whenever you call and you call the Pentagon, you call someone, you ask about evidence, you'd always get the standard response. Well, you can't see any of the evidence, we can't talk about the evidence because there are pending cases. There were no pending cases. They were just talking about this tort litigation in New York, but that never went anywhere. All the cases were settled out of court. So that means that there was no legal discovery. Now, this is the man who crafted the myth known as the 9/11 Commission Report. The 9/11 Commission Report basically puts on paper the myth that they want us to take away, that Osama bin Laden did it, la 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 la. And this is the guy, his name is Philip Zelikow. His father was an ad guy and an agent in Hollywood. And he studied at Rice University, I think it was, and he studied the creation and maintenance of the public myth. And that's what he did. That's what he did when he created the 9/11 Commission Report. He crafted, well, he didn't craft it on his own, but he took this outline of the myth, of the accepted myth, and then basically wanted to put flesh on it. So when they would get testimony that fit that myth, they would put it in where they needed it. But when they got contrary testimony, they said, oh, goodbye. So people that had contrary testimony, like William Rodriguez testified for several days, none of his testimony went into the record. And that happened to a lot of people. Because this man was crafting the myth that we are now living under. And what's his background, besides what I told you? He wrote this paper, right here, Philip Zelikow, with John Deutsch and Ashton B. Carter. Ashton B. Carter should raise some eyebrows. He's our new Secretary of Defense. And he wrote this paper called Catastrophic Terrorism in 1998, in which they imagined the transforming event. They imagined the transforming event. And they say at the bottom here that it could happen any day. It could happen next month. And what this paper in Foreign Affairs magazine did, this Council of Foreign Relations, is it basically presented to the intelligentsia group in America, in Washington, the blueprint, what we would do when catastrophic terrorism were to occur. And here these guys are busy imagining the transforming event. Now, What was Ashton Carter and John Deutsch at that time? They were senior directors of a little company called Global Technology Partners, I think it's called LLC, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Rothschild North America. So, here's Ashton B. Carter, here's John Deutsch. They were directors of a company that's owned by Rothschild. That means that our new Secretary of Defense is a gung-ho, ready to go to war agent of the Rothschild family. And you thought we had elected government. And here, he got the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday, he was confirmed. And on Thursday, by Thursday, he was already in Afghanistan. So you can see that Afghanistan is a very important, piece for these guys. The criminal elite. And could it be that Afghanistan is the source of the world's opium production today? All the heroin now basically comes from Afghanistan. Now this man is Kenneth Feinberg. He was the special master of the 9/11 Compensation Fund, which means that he's the guy, whenever there's a catastrophe, starting with 9/11, whenever there's a catastrophe, and money has to be distributed to people, basically buy people off so they don't litigate, that's him. And so he doled out money to about 2,900 families in compensation for the loss of their loved one. But there were 100 families, basically 96 families, who wanted to have their day in court. They wanted to know who dropped the ball on 9/11. They wanted to know who was responsible for the loss of their loved one. Then they had to deal with this woman, Sheila Birnbaum from Skadden Arps. Those 96 families basically faced a war of attrition with the court. And when they got completely worn out and tired and bankrupt and saw no future in litigation, she would pay them off. So all 96 families were then settled out of court. And this is the judge who did it. His name is Alvin K. Hellerstein. He was appointed by Bill Clinton in 1998. Yeah. So he was put in position back in the Clinton time, and they knew that when this happens, they would have their judge in New York City ready to handle the case. And he did. But what's with this Hellerstein guy? He's got Israeli relatives. His son lives in Israel. His son is a lawyer in Israel. His son lives on an illegal settlement. His son's name is Joseph Hellerstein. And his son is actually working for the law firm that represents the key defendant in the 9/11 tort litigation being overseen by his father in New York City. This is a classic conflict of interest. Never mind the fact that the son lives in Israel and the daddy lives in New York City. The case in New York City, the key defendant was ICTS, a Dutch-based company owned by Israeli Mossad that provided the airport security at Boston Logan Airport and screened the passengers. So how did these 19 guys with Arabs and with box cutters and all this stuff get on the planes? If they got on the planes, that company, Huntley USA, owned by ICTS, should be able to give some answers to these questions. But these questions have never been asked in court, or never been answered in court, and never will be, because he dismissed the Israeli company, but the conflict of interest remains. This man oversaw a process that was completely corrupt, in which Israel was being protected from beginning to end. So these are just basically, it's hard to read, these are just some of the key positions in the whole 9/11 matrix or saga. And at every point, this is just some of them, at every single point, you have an Israeli national, a Mossad agent, or an American Jew who's dedicated to serving the state of Israel. So how can they have such consistency? And now they're talking about this 28-page document might indicate that Saudi Arabia is involved. That's a red herring. Because Saudi Arabia, whatever role Saudi Arabia had in this role, it's the role of useful idiot. They were being played by these guys, these Mossad guys who certainly, how can they be involved in every single aspect, even in making the memorial after the fact? So why am I talking about this? Because the name of this little tour that I'm giving right now is Solving 9/11 Ends the War, like my sign said at the Oscars. Because when you understand the deception of 9/11, when you understand how we've been deceived, you will no longer be susceptible to this kind of propaganda to wage war. Because that's what took us in, that was the game changer. That was the seminal event of our time. That event was designed to take this country into a long, long war against Islam, basically. Against Arabs, Muslims, what have you, people in the Middle East. But primarily against Muslims. So now, then we have American guys over here basically waging war on every male in Afghanistan or Iraq. And we don't speak the languages, we don't understand the culture, we're way out of our depth. Who's advising us? The Israelis, of course. The Israelis advise us on all this stuff. On bombing targets, where to go. Here's the latest Israeli show. This is ISIS, Islamic State. And one thing I want to point out is that this is just the latest phase in the war of deception, the war on terrorism. And Rupert Murdoch's paper, the Wall Street Journal, he owns that paper. Lead editorial today says, now is the time, because these guys are breaking down statues in Nimrod, now is the time for America urgently to go to war with these guys. We got to destroy these guys. But this whole threat is constructed. This is a construct. This is not reality. You see, I want to show you, this is a video supposedly of some mass beheading or something like that. They're all wearing nice uniforms and all posing for the camera very nicely. It's coming to us from a group called SITE, S-I-T-E Intelligence Group in Virginia. SITE Intelligence Group is a Mossad operation. It's run by a woman named Rita Katz, an Iraqi Jew who's a Mossad agent. And all of these videos come to us from her. How odd. This is another one you see over here, SITE Intelligence Group. Brings you the latest video about the beheading. Here she is, Rita Katz, having a good hair day. The woman who found the ISIS execution video. Breaking news, CNN. ISIS claims second American beheaded. ISIS. She's the one who found this, they said. She found this video. Here's what she said on CNN, with a Hebrew accent. She said, the location from where the video was obtained is the location where ISIS usually uploads their original videos to. The video shows a clear message from ISIS that follows the same message that it had before. Her English isn't very good. And in fact, within a short time after our release, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time, they would be releasing the video. Only we actually had that video beforehand, and were able to beat them with the release. Now go figure. How does this little Israeli website in Virginia have the video beforehand and releases it before the guys who actually do the beheading have released it? See, this is when you understand the wag the dog aspect of this whole thing. And why it's so important, is because I know from my short 4 days here in Visalia that a lot of people from this town have been over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of guys from Fresno, a lot of people from the Valley, a lot of people from California. California actually is by far has the most veterans who have been wounded or killed in this war. I mean, that makes sense, being a big state. But this is just a grisly scene from, I think, Iraq. And here, this poor fellow has lost his head. And these guys here are wandering around in a daze, kind of like, I don't see anything, do you? The only guy who's actually looking at the poor man who's died is over here. He's looking at that body. The rest of them are in shock because they're in a war they don't understand because the war doesn't make sense. They don't know why they're in Iraq. And they see terrible things day in and day out. And when they come home, they're damaged goods. Many of them will never be the same again. They wind up being homeless. They wind up having violent problems. They're completely disengaged from their family. They're no longer able to communicate with their family. And all of this just gets worse and worse and worse. And what usually happens is that they often die in suicide because they've seen and done such things that they can no longer live with themselves. And this is the one girl in Michigan who lost her brother, and this is a pain that's felt by thousands of American families. And this is the last slide. This is just like a poor girl in Arlington, Virginia, Arlington National Cemetery. She's lost her father, it looks like. That's her mom. But when you lose somebody in these kinds of wars, especially when they're criminal wars, if it's a war for the defense of your nation, that's one thing. Then you can be. But when in these wars, now this girl is going to be affected for her whole life, and most likely her children, if she has children, will also be affected. And with this is what I end the program with. So if you have any questions or like to get some food, feel free to get some food, and I'd be happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.